Now, I once read, actually I read it in one of my books. It was written by a man called Jeff Slattery, who was a restaurateur, a restaurant critic for The Age, if I remember rightly, and also a publisher. Anyway, the point of the story, he said that people can't be bothered doing stews because they have to wait for it to stew. Now, doesn't that sound... I thought it was funny at the time. Maybe it wasn't funny, but I thought it was funny. Anyway, it is true, because what happens is that we tend to do stir fries and grills and get on the barbecue and things like that because we're time poor. We're not so time poor these days, but anyway, I like the idea of stews. My mother and grandmother made the most beautiful stews. In fact, my grandmother was interesting because she had a coal stove, because my grandfather and all his family, all my father's family, were basically coal miners. So they had a big coal stove, and when she'd finished cooking at the end of the night, she would put a pot of stew in, so while the embers died down, the stew would cook, and she'd get up in the morning, the whole house smelt of this beautiful stew. It really did, it was beautiful. Actually, the French used to do it with the baker's oven. You know, when the baker had finished baking, they used to take their things to the baker's oven. Anyway, that's beside the point. That was just while I was waiting for the oil to heat. I'm a clever bugger, aren't I? What I've got here is a kilo of cubed lamb shoulder. You always use the tougher cuts for a stew, because otherwise, if you use the better cuts, what happens is they toughen. Sounds weird, doesn't it? But that's the truth. So I've got a kilo there, and I'm going to brown that in a couple of lots. So we just put it in a nice heavy bottom casserole, as I said, in a couple of lots, and we season it pretty well. Good sea salt, decent amount of pepper. And all you're trying to do is seal in all the juices. So you just keep on churning it. See, if you put it in when you actually haven't sealed it, what happens is the juices run out. They really do. I know that sounds a bit weird, but they do. So when it's sealed, which it has now, and we'll just grab a pair of tongs and we'll pull it out. Leave the oil behind, because otherwise you find if you tip it out, you've got all the oil that's still there, and it ends up a bit over oily. When we had a restaurant, we used to do lots of stews there, and gee, they were popular because, as I said, people just didn't cook them at home. I reckon they mostly are now, but there was a period there they weren't. All right, put the rest of that in. Once again, nice amount of seasoning. You season it at the beginning, you'll find you don't have to add as much at the end. So when people say to me, oh, you put a lot of salt in, yes, but I don't add it at the end. In fact, I very rarely put seasoning on the table because it doesn't need it, because I've cooked the food with seasoning. The other thing that I do when I'm making a stew is I put lots of veggies in. Some people make it and they put, just a few. I like the idea of there being lots of veggies. One, it cuts back on the price. Two, it gets your veggies. You need a certain amount of veggie per day. Well, there's a good way to do it. I have to tell you, I think the butcher was being nice to me because he's a good mate. He gave me a bit more than a kilo, so I'm a bit excited. I got a bit more for nothing. So it needed some fresh oil and also a good dollop of butter. The butter's optional. I think it adds some extra flavour. I really do. And I've also got some garlic here, which while that's just melting, I'll just slice. You can crush it if you like. I like the texture if there being some sliced garlic, but that's just me. We better put those veggies in. Now, I've got about 8 mushrooms. I've got 1 large onion, which I've cut into wedges, and I've got 2 capsicum, which I've seeded, cored, and sliced. So we'll throw those in. And we'll just saute that. I've also got a couple of bay leaves, and I've also got this beautiful rosemary. Now, can I tell you the story? Because I'm being very informative today, but my wife goes walking every night with our dog, and she was walking past this, and it's on the nature strip, and there is this amazing bed of rosemary that obviously somebody has, well, they may not have planted, it may have been naturally got there, but it's the most beautiful rosemary. So I should use it more often, shouldn't I? So a couple of stalks of rosemary. And if you feel you need the tiniest bit more oil, which I do, because that's a little bit dry. Now don't worry about all the stuff on the bottom, because that's great, because you scrape that up, that's all the caramelization of that lamb. So scrape those goody bits up as you're doing this. And we don't need to colour this, but we just need to start the cooking process. If you put the veggies in raw, it's a bit like not sealing the lamb. If you put them in raw, they always come out tasting, particularly mushrooms. They taste raw, don't they? It's like when you get a pizza. Gee, I'm informative today. When you get a pizza and they put raw mushrooms on top, isn't it awful? It is awful because the mushrooms still taste raw. And I love mushrooms. They need to cook. 100 mils of red wine. Now, I like to measure my liquids, well, within reason anyway, but it does help to have the right amount. 1 cup, which is 250 mils of chicken stock, and here he goes, talking about measuring 400 grams of passata. Now what I've also got here is half a tablespoon of brown sugar. When you're doing tomatoey sauces, I always add some brown sugar because it does need a bit of sweetness because it often is a bit tart. So some brown sugar goes in. Also, what I've got here now, a Greek friend of mine suggested this. Potatoes, now these are kipflers, and I have just cooked them on one side, if you have a look there. So I've just cooked them on one side. The other side I haven't, and they're raw. And what happens then, because of you cooking them on one side, they come out and they're creamier. I know it sounds weird, but I promise you, trust me, it works. And we'll just bring that to the boil. Then we will return the lamb, and then we're going to simmer it very gently, please, very gently, for about, an hour. Check it after an hour, maybe an hour and a quarter. Depends on the size of your lamb, doesn't it? Well, this is looking rather good. Actually, it looks brilliant, doesn't it? Now, I'm just going to add some olives to it, pitted black olives, and also this just adds a little lift to it, a splash of red wine vinegar. I only do it at the end. It just adds a little bit of oomph. Some chopped parsley in there as well, and we'll just mix that in, and we'll also taste it for seasoning just to make sure that I'm happy with that. But it looks good, doesn't it? Lovely rich colour. Oh goodness, guys, that is delicious. Delicious. I'll just turn it up a bit, just for a few seconds, because I just want to, sort of get the red wine vinegar to be part of it and heat up those olives, and then we'll be ready. And the wine to go with it. Now, my friends from Cellar Door, which is Sasha and Denis, have come up with this. I love this name, Silence of the Lamb Shiraz. It's a good one. And can I read the notes? I love the notes. I mean, I'm not saying that I ever believe them, but I do. People who write these wine notes, and I presume Sasha or Denis wrote them, they do get a bit excited, don't they? Dark red in colour, smoky meat, dark plum and subtle clove scents evolve from the glass, followed by more pepper notes. I don't care. It just tastes bloody good, my guys. And what a name. Anyway, we're looking good here. I don't think you need any other veggies. You could look, if you're really keen, you could have a nice green salad alongside, or some green veg of some sort, some broccoli or green beans. I don't really think it needs it because I reckon it's got a lot of veggies in there. But what I would add, I suppose, this is just me, a big hunk of baguette, just to mop up those beautiful sauces. All right, guys, I reckon that's almost good enough to go with a glass of Silence of the Lambs Shiraz. I've already started, I'm sorry. I'm a bit ahead of you with the wine today. Silence of the Lambs Shiraz from my dear mates Sasha and Denis, and the most beautiful lamb shoulder stew.